Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, we're going to talk about navigating disruptive change with special guest Rick Hermann, Director of U.S. Public Sector at Intel.
Hey, good afternoon, Darren. Super happy to be here.
Hey, thanks for coming on the show, Rick. It's been some time. I finally wrangled you into coming on the show.
No, I'm happy to be here.
So, Rick, tell me a little bit about your background, why we want to listen to you about navigating disruptive change.
Yeah, I recently celebrated my third decade at Intel, quite a milestone. I've spent 20 years of that in the public sector, both internationally as well as in the domestic U.S. market. And as you can imagine, over that time, we've navigated a tremendous amount of change and some very, very big events. Whether those events were post 9/11, post the Great Recession, and certainly today COVID. So we have navigated through some very, very significant external forces. We've also navigated through some very, very tough competitive situations and industry changes over that time. So I'm here and happy to be here to kind of share my experiences as we've navigated much of that change.
Well, and I've seen you navigate it as, I work for you, Rick. So it's been really great to see your leadership through this massive shift that we saw, not just in the public sector, but across the world in enterprise and the public sector. And it's a major shift that I don't think we'll ever see again. It's been fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's interesting because when you think about the change and you think about navigating the change, right? We've had to navigate events that are enormous, right, in scope and scale. If you think about just my career at Intel, right, the rise of the internet, the dot-com boom, then the dot-com bust, 9/11, climate events that are kind of impacting our business in the areas of like energy, the Great Recession, and now the pandemic. If I look over the last 3 decades, it almost feels like we are in a constant state
That's a good
of managing turmoil and change. And I think it's important to recognize that because, organizations either wither in those moments or organizations come out better and stronger in those moments. And in my experiences at Intel, has done very well navigating that level of change. But it feels like we're constantly navigating, a very, very high degree of uncertainty, of turmoil, of change, and disruption. It's just the nature of, I think, our modern enterprise and modern economy.
So, all right. So through all these, that's a lot of change really in 30 years when you think about it. What have you found works well? What doesn't work? I mean, how do you categorize all this? Because that's a lot of different things to kind of bundle up. And how do I wrap my head around this?
I think there are very high impact events, right? Economic downturns are high impact events. The pandemic is a high impact events, but those events, they don't happen frequently. We're actually on a pace of like once a decade. We see those types of things, and I think every situation differs in terms of its impact, the level of turmoil, chaos, or change that occurs. In speed is the thing that I think you always have to be thinking about, because some events unfold over a fairly long period of time. If you think about changes, structural changes in our industry, technology changes, they take a long time to unfold, and then all of a sudden you get all of these things that converge at once and everything accelerates, right? And becomes very, very fast. And so when I think of these events, I think of them as the magnitude of the impact, but also the speed of the impact. And I think you can see kind of very different things. Lots of these kind of small but impactful things, but also these very significant events such as the pandemic, which I think for us in this moment is, we would probably all agree, we're probably never going to do healthcare the same way again, right?
Yeah.
Telemedicine. Work is forever changing. We were just talking about our schedules for 2021 and looking out in the June, July timeframe and saying it's probably unlikely that we're going to go to the typical 5-day conference, right? We'll probably be home for 3 days, right? We'll do all the, breakout sessions online, and then we'll probably go in for 2 days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And because that physical connectivity and social networking is still really vital, but we anticipate just very big structural changes as a result of a major event that has unfolded at incredible speed.
So Rick, real quick on COVID, would you say it was high impact and very fast, or was it more impactful and fast? Because a lot of companies, what I saw, a lot of companies already had plans for more remote work, more collaborative, and it appears that COVID accelerated those plans and then added a kicker on top of it to even move further.
Yeah,
I mean, what would you say?
I mean, it was a very high impact event at unprecedented speed. I think the thing that's interesting in COVID is that we have been building out the infrastructure to respond to COVID for a decade. The telecommunications infrastructure, right. One-to-one learning in education, right? The density of technology, and if you think about the technology has been there for telehealth for many years now, but it actually took an event. It took this event to actually begin to leverage that technology and put it to practical use. It also changed the very policy environment. So one of the interesting things in this moment, or in any crisis, is actually how policy changes. And I think that's one of the things that you see in these major events that unfold with great speed, right, is a fundamental change in the policy environment. So if you go back and you look at the Great Recession, and you look at the changes that happened in the policy environment, we'll never let that happen again. Or if you look at the response in 9/11, right, the policy environment and how that changed. And I think we will see very similar things here post-COVID. And so these events, as difficult as they are, also provide an opportunity to take a gigantic step forward in how organizations perform, how we use technology, and they can be significant in terms of both individual growth, but also organizational growth.
So are you saying during these times, it's best to take that step forward? Because a lot of people are playing defense during this time. They're like, I just have to keep my business running. I get the feeling like you're like, well, now's the time to make those changes. Now's the time to step forward instead of hold your ground.
Yeah, I used to have a great mentor who you knew well, a gentleman by the name of Scott Harrison. Your mileage will vary, right? Meaning everybody's situation is going to be significantly different. So I'll talk to it from what I've seen in the 3 decades of Intel. Intel has always stepped forward in those big challenges, in those big moments, in those downturns, in those disruptions. And I think they've always kind of stepped forward, right, in responding to difficult situations. To your questions about readiness, organizations just don't respond to crisis in a moment. It's actually the fact that you built a culture that has a degree of readiness. And that culture largely is built on, have you built trust within an organization? When you go through a major situation like we are with COVID, do people feel safe? We talk a lot about Amy Edmondson and psychological safety, right? Have you built an organization that has good psychological safety for people? Do you have a shared purpose and shared values within an organization at a mission level, but also in the moment? I recall, all of our technical resources, yourself included, within hours of us realizing what was happening, we also realized that we had unique skills and capabilities that we could bring both to our customers and to the organization. And that was very much in line with our core mission and values as a company. And then, do you empower people? Do people feel like they can be empowered in that moment? I am amazed in a company that is as complex as Intel, right? The level of empowerment that is given to our employees in that moment, right? To just wipe away normal processes and bureaucracy and move with incredible speed and agility. And we don't always operate like that. You can't.
No, you can't.
You can't always operate that. But in crisis, right? You're asking about readiness. I mean, I think a very, very big part of being able to respond is, how have you built your culture? How have you built your organization? I mean, psychological safety doesn't happen at a company level. It happens at the organizational level. It's driven by frontline managers, second line managers. The CEO and the senior manager can set the tone, but at the end of the day, it actually gets carried out at the front line by frontline managers.
All right. So all this change that we've had, you've talked about some key aspects here: being ready, psychological safety. These are all really cool aspects. In fact, we saw this, right, with our CEO when COVID hit. He goes,
yep.
No one's getting laid off because of COVID, period.
Yep.
There wasn't even any question about it. And I have to tell you, as an employee and looking at all this, I now felt like I could take risks. I could go out and try and do things I normally wouldn't do in this crisis without fear of getting canned. And it let me address the crisis, right? Personally, and also in the industry without any reprisal, right? I'm not doing anything crazy stupid, but I didn't feel, I wasn't afraid of losing my job. Does that make sense?
It does, but I think, when I think about these issues and I think about, how you navigate disruptive change, and everybody's going to have, how do I talk about this? For me, it's about having that readiness built in many cases already. And it's, I think, one of the wonderful things about Intel. We have navigated very difficult times. There is a built-in readiness. The things I talked about: psychological safety, shared purpose, empowerment, good decision-making. Those aren't just characteristics of an organization ready to respond. Those are characteristics of a high-performing organization, right? And so those kind of basic building blocks, right, of building high-performance organizations also prepare you for these crises, whether they're, of a pandemic, or whether they're in a structural shift in the industry that's more of a slow burn that you have to adjust to over time.
What do you think is more dangerous for a large organization, the slow burn or the high impact fast?
Oh, slow burn, without a doubt, because if you watch a large organization in a moment, whether it's the Great Recession or whether it was COVID, there tends to be very little debate about what's happening, right?
Everyone knows, right?
Everybody has a very good sense of, well, okay, here's the problem. It's enormous. The magnitude of the problem is enormous. Compare that to, a fundamental business model shift or an architectural shift or a technology that is, manifesting itself in the hype curve, but, we're not really sure if it's material to the business yet. How do you make those adjustments? I actually think those what Grove would call those inflection points, right? I think are more fiercely debated than a moment's very kind of rapidly evolving situation like the pandemic.
So how do you put a fire underneath a large organization that's going through an inflection point? Because you're right. When you said, yeah, they debate what's really going on.
Yeah.
And I've seen this myself, right? I'm sitting there going, it's pretty obvious to me what's going on. Why isn't everyone else on board? What can I do to help my organization see this inflection point, see what's happening? It's a slow burn, but see it. What do you do? How as an org do you survive getting through this?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is listening to your customers, and both in crisis, but also in these slower inflection points or major changes. Your customers will tend to lead you into the right direction. I think you need to have, I think, three ingredients here. You talk a lot about telemetry, which is what are the inputs, right, by which you're trying to assess one of the complexities in a big organization, right, is by the time inputs get to a senior decision maker, they've been through 3 layers of massaging and positioning, and that's really dangerous, right? Again, high performing organizations, truth and transparency is a value of Intel's. I think it's kind of a natural bridge from what we used to call constructive confrontation, which is, you put the data on the table, you don't massage it for executives, and you operate in an organization that there's a high degree of psychological safety where you feel like I can come and I can speak the truth about big problems. And when you talk about telemetry, you talk about having the right telemetry for senior decision makers to make those decisions. A senior decision maker, where if you're, with the customer, 90% of your job is with the customer, you have a very unique perspective and insight. A senior leader may only get 50% of their time, or maybe even less, because they're managing, these massive P&Ls. It's really important that from the customer to the decision maker, that that information, that telemetry, is clear and precise and representative, and not massaged to make things look good.
Well, that's one thing I appreciate about you, Rick, as a manager. If someone wanted to know about an account, you brought the account exec in. You didn't say, hey, you didn't write an email to the account exec and say, tell me everything about this account so I can water it down or fix it before I give it to the executives. I've seen you do it. You bring the account exec in. You're like, hey, they own the account. They understand what's going on in this industry. You need to talk to the person on the front line, the horse's mouth, right? That's one thing that I appreciate about you is you're not afraid to bring your foot soldiers to talk to the general.
Yeah, I think, lesson learned from really great mentors and leaders at Intel over many years. And for me, some of the leadership traits, I know I have a really superb leader when that leader, no matter where they are in the organization, will cut through the organization, even if the span is 3 levels below them, and go to the expert. And the other piece of how you have a good manager and leader on the front lines is that good manager and leader is not afraid when that happens, but encourages that to happen.
Yeah.
Right? We don't, oftentimes you don't need 3 layers of filtering and massaging in between, right? If there's a general manager of a P&L, especially when you're operating in crisis, right? They need to be able to go directly to the expert, right? I mean, I remember, early in my career, Andy Grove would, sit around, the table in Santa Clara with, the engineers that were designing things, right? He would, that was, he would go talk, like most Intel leaders would go talk directly to the person that is most knowledgeable about that issue at that moment. And I think in disruption, in turmoil, in dealing with crises, you have to have a culture that embraces and enables that, as well as is consistently reflecting truth and transparency, because that is the only way that you can truly make good, sound decisions, right? So it's readiness culture, it's right telemetry, and it's decision making. That's how you adapt, right, in the moment.
You mentioned the decision making. This is a tough one, especially in a large organization. Who makes the decisions on things? And we have a rapid process, we have a decision making process that sometimes, and from my perspective, is so convoluted you don't really know who's making the decision. It seems like it's group thought. But you specifically point out decision making is key in having this resilient organization. So who makes the decision? Does it go up? Does it go down? Give me something about, how I effectively do decision making in these disruptive times.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that's a question that everybody should be asking. We suffer from an abundance of meetings, right, today, right? So, when you walk into those meetings, it should be, what decision are we here to make? Who is making this decision? Are we here to debate a topic, or are we here to make a decision on a topic, right? That's, again, just good organizational hygiene, leadership, management. I know approximately what decisions I can make and what my authority is, but I also know when I'm out over my skis and when I need to bring in, a vice president or somebody else, that the decision is bigger than one that I can make, and when I need to call for help. So some of that is experience and judgment, right? When you've been at it for 30 years, right, you develop a sense of experience and judgment that I think is really important. So process, guardrails, right? I think speed has become such an important factor in navigating turbulence, disruption, crisis environment. But you also have to have good processes. I am very fond of Andy Grove's phrase, let a little chaos reign, and then reign in the chaos. Right, that was in Andy's high output management book. And the reason I'm fond of that is you have to let things percolate a bit, right? You have to let innovation breathe, right? And the one thing that process in decision making can do is it can constrain the oxygen and not let things breathe, right? And you want to let things breathe a little bit, but at the same time, you want to be able to manage things in such a way that they don't careen out of control, right? That you don't have resources kind of doing things and applying things that don't make sense, right? We have to make really big decisions about resource allocation in a moment of a crisis, some of those longer burn inflection points, you have to make decisions about pivoting resources, right? Those are challenging decisions. But when I think it, to your question, sometimes decision making can be convoluted. My very simple answer to that is every person should be walking into a meeting and saying, what decision is to be made here? Who is the decision maker? Or are we simply preparing the telemetry and data for a decision maker because we need a decision as an organization? And I think that's just good hygiene.
I really like that. That really helps clarify, because I think we all realize if it's at a high impact and fast, decision making is pushed down the chain. Right. It really, because you need quick response to things. You don't have time to wait. Oh, well, we got to have a prep meeting for decision making. But inflection points, those long burns, there's some strategic decisions that have to be made. And you need to make sure you have the air cover to last long enough through the inflection point and almost guide or steer your direction through that inflection point. And you don't want that down at the fast level, down the chain as far as you can, because people down on the chain, like myself, right? I'm going to more react to what's happening in the moment to get done what I need done this quarter, more so than an executive who's looking at long-term goals, looking at these long inflection points.
Yeah, and I think for managers and leaders, when you think about that decision making, especially in difficult times like the pandemic or crisis again, where psychological safety is so important. A couple of things are there really important, right? I think one is really having a deep understanding of where people are as individuals, because everybody is going to be in a different space. You have to think through what the impact of those decisions are, and this is where I think frontline managers, second line managers are just so critical to the ability of an organization to execute well in a time of disruption or turmoil, because it really is those frontline managers, right, that will help bring the organization through something significant. Obviously, senior leadership is absolutely key, right? How the tone that they set, the overall culture. But those things are carried out by individuals on the front line, right? They shoulder the work that has to be done in a crisis situation or in a time of great change.
No, I totally agree. Well, Rick, hey, this has been wonderful. I think we got some real great value out of your vast experience on through three major high impact changes, right? I mean, really, and you didn't even mention we're going through probably 2, maybe even 3 inflection points in the last 30 years as well, right?
And we have big ones in front of us, right?
Yeah.
So as you look to the future, the potential impact of artificial intelligence on 5G, that's the technological landscape. But also if you think about the external landscape and, what we can anticipate as we look at problems like climate change, right? Part of what we started talking about is sometimes it feels like we are in a constant state, right, of navigating difficult situations. But we know that. So part of what leaders and managers have to do is constantly build a culture that is resilient and adaptable, and to help people, right, manage and navigate through those changes with a great degree of resilience and adaptability. I think this is one of the hallmarks of Intel's culture, right, which is its ability to respond, adapt, and be resilient.
Great. Hey, thanks a lot, Rick. And I look forward to doing more podcasts with you. This was a lot of fun.
Okay. Thank you very much, Darren.
Thanks for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you liked our episode, go ahead and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast or video streaming site. You can also find out more on embracingdigital.com. Until next time, keep moving forward and do something wonderful.